Okay, welcome back to Hollywood Balls with me, Geordie Pete Redding. Got a corker of a show lined up for you today. We're going to get straight into it. Now, my next guest deservedly takes his place in the Wolverhampton Wanderers Hall of Fame. Played at the highest level for them, Coventry, Bristol Rovers, Seattle Sounders as well, by the way. Spent life as the gaffer with Walsall and Cardiff, which we'll get onto in a bit. But welcome to Hollywood Balls, first of all. Kenny Hibbit.
Hi, Pete. How are you?
We're very well, thanks. And, I've been getting a bit of grief off my Wolverhampton friends out here in Dubai. They've got a big supporters club. And they were saying to me, when are we going to get some Wolves content on the show? It's Newcastle this, Manchester that. Well, we have delivered. So what have you been up to currently? I mean, it's tough to get
Well, since coming out of management of football, I've been actually working for the Premier League for the last 17 years.
Yeah.
Assessing the officials, and I know there'll be a lot of people smiling.
Job, is it?
Yeah, but it's been very educational for me to see the insight of what officials really go through and the difficulties they have on the field of play with players. And we was really brought in as a group of delegates, ex-players and managers, to try and help them manage footballers on the football field,
Yep.
And so we've been doing that, and I've been assessing young referees that want to make that progress into the Premier League, into the elite group, as they call them.
Yep.
So I've been doing all that, and I helped. I've helped a lot of young referees progress to where they are at the moment. So it's been quite therapeutic for me, still being involved in football as well, but seeing it from a different angle from playing days and management days.
It's awesome, and it's really interesting you say that. I'm going to have to pick up on it because it's something my father said to me, and he says it most weeks as well. And it's something like, why don't they involve a lot more of the ex-players and the people that were actually on the pitch in the player's role, because they know what goes on through playing the game. So it's a good move, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why it was brought in. I was I was the first of about a group of 12 of us 17 years ago, and it's just picked up and it's progressed really well. But we've had a few problems of late, as we all know, with the VAR that's coming to the game, and I think that's taking away, I feel, the referees' decisions.
Sure.
And I don't think it's working as well as what people thought it might. I think we can use it better without being too cynical with it. To find that somebody's toenail or somebody's fingernail or something's offside, it's purely ridiculous. But that's come from FIFA, so they've got to eradicate that, and we've got to get something that if the chest, the body, upper torso is over in an offside position, we can understand that. But a foot or a finger, or it's becoming a bit of a joke at the moment, and it's something that has got to be put right very quickly.
Indeed, it is a joke, a bit of a lottery as well. We're going to take you back down memory lane. Your journey kicked off at Bradford Park Avenue. Tell us about that. Was it a good grounding for your future success, Kenny?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, I'm a Bradford lad, and I know there was, when I was representing Bradford schoolboys and Yorkshire schoolboys, there's always scouts that comes looking for you, and I had a few opportunities to go in a lot of the Yorkshire clubs, but my hometown club was Bradford Park Avenue. They're those I used to support as a kid, but I used to go to Bradford City one week and Bradford Park Avenue the next week, but Park Avenue was all my favourite team. So I said to my dad that Terry was at Leeds, and I wanted to play for my own town. And I thought, if I'm going to progress, it looks better going upwards than it is from the top coming downwards. In them days, it was a big, it was something that you didn't really want your family and your friends to see you doing. So I went to my hometown club as a 15-year-old and as an apprentice. And I graduated. Well, we didn't have a youth team, so we had a reserve side. And I progressed then into the first team at 60. So I was quite fortunate that, although Bradford Park Avenue, we weren't the greatest team. We were always in the bottom four, but it was a great grounding for me. I was playing against some really tough players, you know, strong defenders and with boots over their ankles and shin pads down the front and the back of the legs and everything, you know. So it was a good grounding for me as a 16-year-old. And then it progressed from there with Joe Gardner, who was the chief scout at Wolves. He always had, when I got to know him a bit better, he was the one that was looking at lower level teams that was introducing young players into their side, and he followed me for 2 years nearly. And then when I was 17, they had an offer for £5,000, Bradford. And of course, we financially in them days, you know, in 1968, we just sold Kevin Hector to Derby.
Yeah,
who was a great player, Kevin. Unfortunately, I didn't get the opportunity to play with him. But they needed some money, and he went for 40 grand, which kept the club going for some time after. And then I went for 5 grand to Wolves in November 1968, and that helped him for another half a season. But then they gradually went out of the Football League. But it was a great grounding for me. It was one of the hardest apprenticeships I think anybody could ever have, because I had to go back on a Tuesday and Thursday night training with the amateurs because I didn't have time to train at the club. I was doing all the sweeping the stands and rolling the pitch, and I was doing everything. And I had, in the summer, I was forking the pitch with a 4-pronged fork to get the seeds in to get it growing for the next season. It was just me and the groundsman. So it was a hard, but it was worth everything, you know. It taught me a great deal.
Amazing, and I think that, you know, a lot of that is missing in today's game, in my opinion. I find it fascinating, you know, that because when you read about ex-players and their careers, you know, we have to do our research, and you see where they start out and then they make that jump to the big jump to the big club. But it's fascinating for you to say that scout that obviously, you know, had done his due diligence, so to speak, watching you, looking at you, waiting for the right time, and then bang, it all sort of takes off for you. So you were saying it was 2 years, literally.
Yeah, that's right. This is what he explained to me. But, you know, I was talking to a guy about 3 or 4 years ago who was a scout for Oldham. And he said, if we'd have had another £500, we'd have bought you. I thought that was a bit of luck. with all due respect to Oldham. But
could have been the best 500 quid they ever spent.
I know. I would have probably gone there, and my career maybe taken a different diversion. But fortunately, they didn't have that extra 500 quid, and I ended up going to Wolves. And it was a remarkable thing, because I just lost my father. Me and Terry just lost my father at 40 years of age. He was, and so it was a big decision for me to move to Wolverhampton from Bradford, where Terry was living away from home. Just my mum and my sister. So it was a big decision for me which way I went. Whether do I stay at home or do it? And of course, my mother persuaded me, saying that's what your dad wanted to see. He wanted you and Terry to be playing in the first division. He wanted to see that, and of course I got on the train and went to Wolverhampton. And of course, every time it stopped at the station, I wanted to get off and go home. I didn't know where they were going to. Geographically, I don't know where Wolverhampton was. But it was a great decision, and I think my father was pushing me all the way there. Yeah.
And they certainly know about you. Arguably the highlight of your career. I mean, you know, it ticks all the boxes really for me. You know, as a fan, always wanting to have played. Big cup final day, underdogs, win the cup, and score at Wembley. So I've got to ask, was 74 your favourite footballing day, do you think?
Well, it's one that I look back and with pride, because as a youngster growing up, me and Terry always used to watch the cup finals, and we'd be out with the ball before the kick-off, we'd be out with the ball at half-time, we'd be out after the game, all these cup finals, and all I could see was Wembley Stadium and where England played, and one of my favourite players was Bobby Charlton, and I watched him play for England, scoring great goals. So with his right foot and left foot, and Terry was more left foot than I was, and we spent hours and hours and hours trying to get better and improve, but our dream was always to play at Wembley. Unfortunately, we both played in 1974. He played in the FA Cup final, and I played in the League Cup final.
We won't mention the FA Cup final.
I know. Yeah, I was fortunate to get a result, and of course Newcastle didn't. But it was always a dream of ours, like every kid in them days. You know that you just want to play at the top, and playing at Wembley in a cup final was the top for me. But it was a great day. We were underdogs. They had some fantastic players, Man City, and we were. When you're at Wembley, you come out of the dressing room and there's a guy at the bottom of the tunnel, and we all lined up, and we were like regimental. But I looked across the Man City's team, and they're tossing the ball up on the shoulder, Rodney Marsh, Francis Lee, and all them. You think, oh my God. And I had to say I was a nervous player anyway, but I was frightened to death and thinking. Anyway, we walked out, and then just right in front of us were 50,000 black and gold. Banners and waving the flags and stuff, and that picked us all up, and we had the determination that day to go on and win it. Fortunately,
an absolute dream. I mean, just sitting listening to that is like it sends shivers down my spine. As I say, there were some real famous names in playing at Wembley that day. But did you know that there was a very famous ball boy?
Yeah, no, I didn't know. I did not know that. And I explained that to my wife last night, and I couldn't believe it. Really cool. And I know Steve, and we've spoke, plenty of times when we've met, but never once did I know that.
Yes, amazing. There was Steve Bruce was a ball boy at the tender age of 13, so even then the football tendencies were strong. Now you mentioned your brother briefly there, Kenny, and I'm going to come on to him because it's a nice link. I mean, my father, Newcastle fan, like myself, like many others, who absolutely marvelled at your brother and his time in the black and white. But he was a massive influence on you personally, which you've stated, and godlike status at Newcastle, as I've said. My dad's phrase being that he could put it on a sixpence with his eyes closed, and Dad's always told me that. And I love the fact, and I want you to tell us about it, that I think he gave you a bollocking, didn't he, for scoring 4 against us once?
Aye. Molyneux, yeah. It was a great day for me personally, because playing against that kid was always a pleasure, and it felt. Well, I don't know what the feeling was really. All I was thinking, I hope he didn't get injured, and he thought the same with me. And it was because he played on the left side and I played right side, so we was actually playing against each other. I made sure I didn't get too many tackles on him, and I'm sure he felt the same way. It was pretty awkward at times, but it was something that we'd always dreamed about, playing in the first division together. Never thought we'd play against each other so often, but that day in '74 was my day. Everything happened for us. Everything happened for me personally, and we walked off at the end of the game, and he came up to me, put his arm around me, he called me a so-and-so. I won't repeat it on the show, but he said, but if we were going to get beat, he said, I'm glad you scored the goals.
Brilliant.
And I've still got that ball. I've still got the ball. It's not in great nick, but it's like I've still got it. The old Minerva, yeah. But it was a special day for me.
Speaking of scoring 4 against Newcastle, I mean, I think you set a trend, because I remember it was quite a special year for me. 1990, Steve Bull came up to Newcastle, and I remember the headlines the next day. You were in the local papers. It had, "We've been bulldozed." Bully scored 4 at St James's, and that also marked my first ever away game as a Newcastle fan as well in 1990. I went to Molyneux, and I was just amazed because we stood behind that goal. And it just seemed to go on forever and ever and ever. I think there was about 6,500 away fans that day. So very, very happy memories linked between Wolves and Newcastle. But you scored 4 against the 2 before Bully, so we'll always remember that.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Peter.
Now the scenario is that and this is something that I'm really interested in. Moving from a player to a manager, I can imagine becoming it must carry all sorts of different permutations, different worries, different stresses. But My good friend Lee Clark, who was at Birmingham, I remember I paid him a visit, and I spent a few days watching Birmingham train. I was lucky; I was down at West Hills watching the guys do that. And I always remember him telling me that it didn't matter what you did all week on the training ground. Literally on a Saturday afternoon, when they went over that white line, it was you couldn't do any more. Did you find that frustrating as a gaffer?
Yeah. It was a pain actually, because he was quite right. You work every day. You worked on, particularly on Fridays, you worked on set pieces, attacking play, free kicks around the box, corners and stuff like that. And you had certain players that could deliver, so you made sure that they got on the ball, who was a good delivery of the ball. And you also got players in the box that was good in the air, two big centre backs, and you centre forward if you had them available. And then your first minute, you get a free kick in that area that you'd been working on the Friday, and it all went cock up. It went all over. It went absolutely. Everybody wanted to get on the ball. Everybody wanted to, and you're screaming from the side, get out, get away from the ball, just do what we've been practicing. But yeah, it was frustrating at times. But it's quite right that it depends on the quality of players that you've got, the standard of players that you're working with. As long as they're giving 100%, I had time for players that gave 100% on the field. I didn't like players that were shaking their head, feeling sorry for themselves. I like people that go out there and give you 90 minutes and give you 100%. So players with probably not as much ability as some, you always got that. Players that had probably more ability than others, sometimes decided I don't fancy it today or something like that. And it was frustrating as a manager, particularly from my level where I was managing at as well in the 4th division.
Tough.
I had to work really hard to try and get a squad of players that I could believe in and trust when I threw them on the field. I knew what I'm going to get from them, but that takes time to build. And I look back at my 4 years at Walsall and 4 years at Cardiff, and I took over at Walsall when they'd been relegated 2 years on the trot from the 2nd division to the 3rd division to 4th division. I had a lot of work on trying to move a lot of the experienced players out that was financially getting well paid as a 2nd division player rather than a 4th division player. So that was a lot of work there. And I had also, as an 18-year-old, I had Dean Smith, who's now manager at Aston Villa.
Yes.
And so I made him captain as a young boy. And I'm not surprised he's gone and progressed into a top manager, because he was a great leader, a very good leader. But, and I had no coaching staff, I had no scouting network, I had no money. And that was really, really tough for 4 years. And I used to meet my wife on the motorway, and she'd bring me a coffee and a sandwich while I was going scouting, and I was going up north, down south. And in the end, and then Terry passed away in '94 when I was manager at Walsall, and the chairman said, take as long as you want, but I only took a week, and I wanted to get back to work, but I still wasn't right. And I had a bust up with the chairman, and he dismissed me. So that was heartbreaking. But I took 9 months out to try and recover from losing my brother and also losing my job. But Cardiff came in and took me to Cardiff, and Sam Kumar, the chairman, and they'd just been relegated. So now going into a similar situation at Cardiff as I had at Walsall, trying to, the money that they were on in the higher division and the bonuses all had to be changed. And by getting rid of experienced players who we couldn't afford to keep, I was trying to replace them, which was very, very difficult. And again,
it was like a balancing act.
Well, it is, but you have no assistant. I'd got no coaching staff. I got no scouting, and I was like, I felt I was by myself. And you need somebody to bounce off. You need somebody to speak to, like I'm speaking to you. There wasn't that. I did have a general manager at Walsall, Paul Taylor, who helped me somewhat, but he had other duties to do. So I had 4 years there, and with both teams, I got them both in the playoffs. We just missed out on the playoffs to try and get them promotion. But it took its toll on me. It took a lot out of me. And but I wouldn't change. It was a great experience for me, and I enjoyed every minute. There was some ups and downs, but yeah, it was difficult to start with. But I'd had a lot of experience with Jerry Francis as I was his assistant at Bristol Rovers. So I had 2 years with him, and I learned so much from Jerry Francis, who learned a lot from Terry Venables.
Wow.
And you put it all together, and all the managers that you've played with under, and you try to put it together, and then expand on that as a manager. But Jerry taught me a great deal.
Fascinating. Staying with managers, but just sort of rounding up, bring it to current day. The old gold of Wolves, I mean, they look a right side now, don't they? And they've got a boss who's done incredibly well. They're feared. They play lovely football. They're hard to beat. How far do you think this team can go, the current Wolves side, Kenny?
It depends how long we can keep hold of Nuno. I think since in 4 years he came here, and when we were a championship side, he sort of lined out what he wanted to do, how his approach was going to be, and we've got a great, obviously, a guy over in Portugal, a scout that's and an agent that works well with Nuno. But what he's done, he's brought something back to the club that we never thought would happen again when they went down to the 4th division.
Yes,
you know. So they progressed into the championship, and there was up and down, and never any got much stability there. But now, yes, we have that stability. We have the financial backing of a fantastic owner and company that's supporting Nuno very well. He's built a team that is, like you said, Pete, that is very difficult to beat. We're well organised. Everybody knows their job, and it's nice to go down to Molineux now with a full stadium. I mean, the support that they're getting, the fans have always been fantastic there. And but we have got something to look forward to now, and I think that's what Nuno and the new owners has given us to look forward to the future.
It's great stuff. And, as I say, I have so many happy memories of Wolves myself. And just to end on, I always remember the day I came down to Wolves, and all of the supporters were everywhere, outside the houses, outside the shops. But they all had Steve Bull haircuts, whether they were 60 years old or 4 years old. They all had Steve Bull crew cuts. Just magic. A great side.
Yeah, he did fantastic for the club, and lots of other players as well. Graham Turner, the manager, he just turned it upside down, got us back into where we wanted to be. There was a stage where we were getting 3,500 people, and I never ever thought in the 70s and 80s we would see that happen at Molineux, but it happened, and now they've recovered with a lot of hard work, a lot of groundwork's been done. And a lot of patience from fans, and now they deserve. Now the fans deserve what they're seeing at the moment. It's a very good side, well organised, and the club's going forward. And when Liverpool, we played Liverpool the other way, we got beat 4-0. But it's a difficult time when you've got no fans there to support you and pick you up when you're down, and this is why you're getting so many silly results at the moment. But Wolves are back on the map, and I hope it continues, and I'm sure it will.
I'm sure it will as well, and I'm sure we'll be inviting you back on toward the end of the season to talk about your beloved Wolves. Kenny, it's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to have you on talking about career. Ladies and gents of Hollywood Balls, the one and only Kenny Hibbit.
You're welcome, Peter. Thank you very much.
Okay, to meet Geordie Pete Redding on a very special edition of the show. It's been fantastic. Earlier we talked to Kenny Hibbit, and now it's my great pleasure, and I'm going to have to level with you because it's a bit of a fanboy interview for me. My next guest, English novelist, TV, screenwriter, comedian, you name it. His series Tom Thorne, the crime series, are bestsellers, and he just happens to be my favourite author. So welcome to Hollywood Balls, Mark Billingham.
Hello, mate. How are you?
Well, very well, thanks. Very well. And what about you?
Oh, doing okay. I mean, all this horrible stuff that's going on. it tends to quite suit writers. I mean, that's an awful thing to say, but you know, most of the time we don't need an excuse to spend all day in our pajamas and not go anywhere. So I've been able to get on with work at least.
Yeah, and as we say, so currently, is there anything in the offing? Are you working on something? Can you share it with us?
Yeah, always. I mean, there's a new book. I've written a new book which is coming out next July, and I'm already probably a quarter of the way through the book that's coming out the year after that, 2022. So you know, you're always working at least a year ahead. So yeah, trying to crack on.
Good stuff. I'm going to take you back a bit down memory lane because it's a fascinating story, and it's brilliant. I mean, born in Solihull, a place I've been for many a night out, but that's probably for another podcast. And okay. it is a family show. You've stayed there right through uni, and you gained your degree in drama. Was there a reason that you decided to stay? Because most student friends I've had or know of have been dying to get away.
Yeah, no, it's very simple. It was the only uni I got into. And I was only born in Solihull. I didn't live there. I grew up in Birmingham. You know, Solihull's very, very posh Birmingham, if it is Birmingham at all. I grew up in a place called Moseley in Birmingham. And yeah, I wanted to do drama, and I applied to all the usual universities around that time, places like Bristol and Exeter and Manchester, and didn't get in. And then I went for my interview at Birmingham, which I just put on my list thinking, you know, it had a very good reputation, and I got sort of an unconditional offer from Birmingham. So I ended up there. I wasn't living at home. I hadn't lived at home actually since I was in the sixth form. Right. I'd got a flat because my mum had moved out to a place called Redditch. She'd moved a bit further out of Birmingham, so that was a bit of a schlep for school.
Worcester, if I'm not mistaken, is it?
That's right. Yeah, Worcestershire. Yeah. So I got a flat in Moseley and stayed in that flat right the way through university, and for a year or two after that.
Indeed, and I mean the acting game. It took you to London. Various great roles. My pick of those has got to be Dempsey and Makepeace. Nothing to do with Guinness Barber, you understand. But your many roles gave you an interesting take on life as an actor, didn't it?
Well, I mean, oddly, most of the jobs I got, I was either playing a copper or a villain, or I got very spectacularly shot to death in Dempsey and Makepeace. And it was all the usual stuff, you know, Juliet Bravo and The Bill and Crossroads, all sorts of stuff. But my life only really changed when I got a job as an actor on this show called Maid Marian and Her Merry Men, which was this kids drama written and created by Tony Robinson. Yeah. And I just went up for that job like any other job in actor, and it pretty much changed everything, because I was doing that for the next 5 years. And by the end of it, I was a writer, because by the end of it, I'd started writing for the show. So that was the job that changed everything, really.
It is. I mean, you say, you know, all of those roles. I mean, it's a good grounding, and all the way along to the future, I imagine that you take all these memories and work ethics with you when it comes to your writing. But something that I've always wanted to do, so I've really got to doff my cap to you, was and I find it terrifying, but I'm intrigued to know what it's like, is stand-up comedy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of actors, a lot of people that were finding the acting game pretty tough, because it is pretty tough. I mean, there's so much luck involved in acting. You know, you walk in to an audition, and you immediately, especially if it's for telly, you immediately think they're looking at you going, too tall, too short, too fat, too thin, whatever. Whereas comedy is very little to do with luck. I mean, you know, to get that huge push so that you end up being, you know, Michael McIntyre or whatever, there's a lot of luck involved in that, getting that lucky finger that propels you into arena tours and stuff. But you can make a fairly decent living as a stand-up, or you certainly could back then when I got into it in the mid-'80s. Just if you could do it. If you can do it, if you can get the laughs, you can work. So, yeah, I drifted into stand-up around then, the mid-'80s, when it was still, you know, you could still do it. You could do your first tryout spot, and within 6 months you could be headlining at the Comedy Store. You know, that it was possible to do that then. It's a much tougher game now, and obviously the pandemic has really hurt the comedy industry, the stand-up industry. But I loved it. I mean, I couldn't keep it up at the end, because I mean, I did it 25 years. But by the time the books started to take off, and I was doing a lot of traveling with the books, you know, something had to give, because there's so much traveling involved in stand-up. You know, I was lucky enough to do stand-up all over the world. But even when you're doing it in this country, it's up to Manchester on a Tuesday, then weekend in Leicester, then, you know, and I had a young family, so eventually I had to knock it on the head.
Did you find it that moment just before you go on? Is it as I imagine? Is it quite nerve wracking? The ritual beforehand?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. I remember the very first time I played at the Comedy Store, which remains the best club in the world. A comic who I'd seen there for over 10 years throwing up before he was due to go on stage, and I thought, bloody hell. And if you were, they used to have a late show that started at midnight. You do a show at 8 and a show at midnight. And by 11:30, the audience for the late show is in, and you can hear them sort of howling. You can hear them, because especially on a Friday, they come in on a Friday night, they've had a night out, they've had a skinful. There's a lot of drunks in the crowd. I mean, it could certainly be very leery. And if you were going on last, you'd be going on stage at 2 a.m. in front of 500 drunks. It was, but you know what? If you couldn't stand dying on your arse, which I did many times, and which every comic I know has done many times. Any comic you can name, I've seen them all die on their arse. You have to just accept that. You have to accept that all the other comics in the dressing room will take the mickey out of you, and you'll have a laugh, and you're going to have a drink at the bar, and it's all fine. If you can't cope with that, you have to get out. You have to get out and do something else.
Interesting. We had Jimmy Carr on the show earlier this year, and you talk about dying on your arse, but I think the other thing that would frighten me is someone heckling, and he literally thrives on that. I mean, he actively encourages it.
Yeah. There are some comics who you meet and you work with who a heckle kind of brings them alive. Yeah. One of the best comics ever at doing that was Bill Bailey. Bill Bailey was fabulous at that stuff. I mean, most of us mortals don't want heckling. We want to do our 20 minute set without anybody shouting taxi or get off or your shit or whatever. But somebody would heckle a comic like Bill, and you'd see like a light come on in his eyes, and he'd go, all right, let's have some fun. Jimmy was like that as well. It's but most of the time, if you're in a good club, in a big club, hecklers can't win because A, you've got a microphone, B, you do it for a living, and C, if it gets really bad, there's security. At the end of the day, if a heckler is ruining the show for all the other paying customers, they'll get turfed out,
Moving swiftly on, I've got to ask you, the transition into writing, I mean, I'm assuming it's a transition. Maybe you were writing anyway. I mean, when you say, you were involved in scripts and stuff, but the transition from leaving the acting position and becoming a full-time writer, is there a link from the acting into that? I'm just fascinated to know.
Well, there's actually more of a link with the comedy, really. I mean, because by the time I started writing the books, I was working as a stand-up, and I carried on working as a stand-up for the first 5 or 6 books, actually. And it's, a lot of the times when I'd be doing interviews, people would say, oh, why would a stand-up comic want to write such dark books? And I'd come out with some flippant answer. But eventually I figured out that there was a link. I mean, comedy had taught me an awful lot in terms of you have to engage your audience really quickly. You can't walk out on stage at the Comedy Store and go, stick with me, I'll get funny in about 10 minutes. You've got to get funny straight away. They'll chuck stuff at you. Yeah. And the same thing applies with a book. If you read a book like I do, I'm going to give a book 20, 30 pages. And if it hasn't engaged me in some way, I'm putting it down and picking up another one. There's too many good books out there. And also you got to keep it going, keep the audience entertained. And also, crucially, jokes are structured in the same way that a lot of crime fiction is. It's all about timing. It's all about the moment when you reveal the key piece of information. And crime novels are full of punchlines. They're just usually very dark,
Interesting. But like you say, you are right. You pick a book up and you look at covers. Because funnily enough, a lot of the content can be, as I see it, can be derived from a cover. Have a look at the back, see if it's your genre, what you like, and go there. But you are right, those first couple of chapters are key. Speaking of characters, concentrate on your famous character, Tom Thorne. Characters are wonderful things in everybody, but everyone's got a different picture. I think that's what the beauty of books is. I always imagine Tom as a pretty tall character, dark, short, spiky hair with dark humour. Is he based on anyone?
No, not really. His name is a lot of the characters in the books, especially the early books, were named after comics. Friends of mine. He's named after a friend of mine, comedian called Paul Thorne. And there are other characters called Kitson and Brigstock and Holland that were all named after comics. No, he wasn't. The first book wasn't even really about him. The first book was more about the victim of this particular crime, but I needed a copper because they'd been a crime committed. So I just came up with Tom Thorne, stuck him on the page, little thinking I'd be writing about him 20 years later. So I never had a plan for him. I never really described him. It's interesting that you think he looks like that. A lot of people think he looks like that because, you know, David Morrissey played him on telly.
Yeah.
So who is, you know, tall and, you know, but I don't really care what he looks like. You know, what he looks like is entirely up to the reader. I know how he thinks, but I'm looking out of the world through his eyes. See what I mean?
Yeah. So you don't have an image of him yourself?
No, not physically. No.
Okay, great. Now, when it comes to the beautiful game and that's football, you're old gold, aren't you? You're a Wolves fan.
I am. Yeah. Always have been.
Going great guns. We were just saying to Kenny, you know, I said to him that looking at Wolves now, what you have is a proper manager, a great team ethic, difficult to beat, but they play some beautiful football as well, don't they?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's lovely. It's lovely to watch. I mean, obviously, it's very difficult to talk about Wolves without, you know, I mean, I went through all the very dark years as well. You know, when I started watching them, which I guess 1970-ish, something like that, you know, they were a great side. You know, a lot of the players I can see behind you. You know, when I first went to see them, Mike Bailey was the captain, Bill McGarry was the manager. So, you know, you had Dugan and Richards and Wagstaff and even Peter Knowles, God's footballer, Peter Knowles. And they were just a brilliant side, you know, still with all that European glory from the sort of 50s, you know, hanging around in the air and stuff. And then, of course, the dark days, you know, the dark days of the 80s and the 90s and stuff. So it's lovely. It's lovely to see them, to see people talking about them like, you know, this could be a team that could get a top 4 finish. You know, this is not a team that is bouncing up and down from the Premiership to the Championship. No, it's lovely to watch.
I think they've got guile, craft, but again, they're hard, which is, you know, you look at the fixture list from any other team, especially mine at the moment, which isn't great, but you go, oh, Wolves away, don't really fancy that. And I think that's sort of tantamount to where they've come from. I've got mixed memories of Wolves. I've got great connections, but they were my first ever away game as a Newcastle fan. So I went to Molineux, old Molineux, I think it was 1991. Yeah. And as I just can remember the terracing, it seemed to be quite far away from the goal, but it just went on forever. There was about 6,000. I think we got a sporty 1-0 win that day, but it was just my first away game. And it was fantastic. I think, but more famously, we mentioned it as well with Kenny, was the New Year's Day of that year when Steve Bull came to town and scored 4. And watching Steve Bull play for Wolves that day was just phenomenal. So I've always had an affiliation with Wolves. They've always been exciting and well supported, right?
Oh, always. I mean, but Bully was absolutely my hero. I mean, when I first started watching him, it was Derek Dugan and Johnny Richards, the Doog. And I remember buying his book, actually. As a kid, he had a book, I think it was called Attack. Just about, you know, how to be a striker. But Bully was just, you know, will always be an absolute legend. Because, I mean, I remember reading that after Italian 90, he could have gone to Europe. I mean, there were plenty of clubs wanting to come in for Steve Bull. And he's like, no, I'll stay here. I'll stay where I am. He was such an incredibly loyal player, which is amazing considering he started at West Brom. But and I don't think too many players, even to this day, I can't think of too many of them who are playing for England when they're actually playing at club level in lower league. You know, they're not in the top flight. So to have the record he had when Wolves were not a great team, no, he will always remain a legend. He was absolute hero, Steve Bull.
Bully. I remember the chant well. It was ringing around my head for months after that New Year's Day demolition. And just bringing you up to speed with current day. I've just been reading about a collection of festive short stories by you and other crime writers. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's a collection called Afraid of the Christmas Lights, and basically the people behind this collection have just put together a bunch of writers. They reached out to a bunch of writers and said, look, have you got anything Christmassy? Could you write something with a sort of Christmas theme? You don't write short stories for money. In fact, it's odd that it's a sort of form, a literary form that's fallen out of favour really, because it's not seen as commercial. You know, writers used to write a couple of collections of short stories and then publishers go, right, you're ready to tackle a novel now, but it doesn't work that way anymore. But yeah, I'd got a short story that I sort of tarted up a little bit. It's a thorn Christmas story. So I let them have that. And the anthology is great because all the proceeds from it are going to various domestic abuse charities. So it's a really good cause. There's some great writers involved. And short stories are fantastic because you can just read one. You can read one on the tube on the way to work. You can read one, you know, in bed at night before you fall asleep. They're, you know, they're all sort of, what, I don't know, 25 pages long or something. It's great fun. Great fun.
Perfect. Now I can't let you go without voicing an opinion on the latest inclusion for the Olympics. We were talking off air, and I'm guessing putting this in for you that it's something that piqued your interest or chagrin, one of the two. So with the Olympics coming up, the latest inclusion, the floor is yours, literally.
Well, I mean, I'm going to sound like such a grumpy old man, but I mean, for me, the rot set in when synchronized swimming became a sport. But this is the inclusion of breakdancing, which, you know, is clearly fantastic if you're a breakdancer, and I'm sure there are professional breakdancers who go around the world. It's obviously I nearly said a sport. It's obviously a pastime, a leisure pursuit that involves a huge degree of commitment and fitness and all that stuff. Yeah. I'm just not sure it's a sport. It just seems a little bit daft to me. You know, the Olympics, you know, growing up, the Olympics were such a great, you know, they were such a brilliant thing. And, you know, there were certain sports you liked more than others. You'd always be looking at, you know, watching for the 100 meters, and it was mostly about the athletics, I think, when I was a kid. And now it just seems to have gone off in, I mean, what, Scrabble? I mean, darts? It just seems a bit daft to me. I mean, I'm not quite going to go as far as to say a sport should involve a ball, but I do tend to think that. Apart from the running and the jumping and the throwing stuff, I tend to watch the stuff that has balls involved.
Well, we are going to caterpillar our way out of the studio. Mark, all that remains is for me to thank you, and we'll ask you again towards the end of the season if you'll join us again, and we'll talk.
Oh, I will. Listen. To be on the same show as Kenny Hibbit is an absolute joy and an honour. So
great stuff, ladies and gents of Hollywood Balls, the one and only Mark Billingham. Thanks so much.
Cheers, Pete. Thank you.